The moment my daughter-in-law pointed down the hallway and said, "The guests don't need to see you sitting there, Dorothy," I understood something I had been refusing to understand for 3 years. I was not a grandmother in that house anymore. I was furniture that had learned to talk back, and she had finally grown tired of the noise. I had been sitting in the armchair by the front window, the one with the faded blue upholstery that my husband had picked out the year we moved in. The holiday wreath I hung every December was on the door behind me. The rugs on the floor were mine. The photographs on the walls were mine. The 32-year mortgage I had paid off with my own hands was mine. And still, when she said it, I stood up. I don't know why I stood. Maybe habit. Maybe the voice that lived in the back of my mind, the one that had been whispering for years that keeping the peace was the same thing as being loved. I smoothed my skirt, picked up my tea, and walked down the hallway to my bedroom like a guest who had forgotten her invitation. I sat on the edge of my bed and listened to the laughter moving through the house, my son's voice, his wife's voice, the voices of her friends, people I had met twice, people who did not know my name but were comfortable eating the food from my refrigerator and sitting on the couch I had reupholstered 2 summers ago. The music was too loud. The kind of too loud that tells you the person controlling the volume is not thinking about anyone else in the building. I set my tea on the nightstand and looked at my hands. 68 years old. 31 years as a bookkeeper for a regional logistics company. The kind of work where you learn that numbers do not lie, that they do not soften the truth out of politeness, that every dollar spent tells a story whether or not you intend to tell it. I had spent my career reading those stories. And sitting there in my own bedroom on a Saturday afternoon, I realized I had been refusing to read the one unfolding in my own house. I want to be honest about something, because I think honesty is the only thing that makes a story worth telling. I was not innocent in how things got this way. When my son came to me 3 years ago, hat in hand, eyes down, and told me he had been laid off and they needed somewhere to land for a few months, I said yes without conditions. No timeline, no agreement, no conversation about what we each expected. I said yes because he was my son, and because I had raised him to believe that family shows up. What I had not taught him, or myself, was that showing up is different from moving in. That love is not the same thing as unlimited access. I had learned patience so well that I had confused it with permission, and by the time I understood the difference, 3 years had passed and someone else was deciding where I was allowed to sit in my own living room. That night, after the guests left and the house went quiet, I did not sleep. I lay in the dark and listened to the settling sounds of the walls and thought about a conversation I had pushed aside 8 months earlier. My daughter-in-law had asked me, very casually, over breakfast, whether I had ever thought about adding her name to the deed. "For simplicity," she said, "in case anything ever happened to me." I had said I would think about it and then found reasons not to think about it. She had not asked again. But the question had never left the room. I got up at 4 in the morning and went to the kitchen. I made coffee and sat at the table with a legal pad and a pen. Old habits. When I worked, every problem I could not solve in my head I solved on paper. I wrote down everything I knew and everything I suspected, and I looked at both lists for a long time. What I knew. My son had not returned to work. In 3 years, he had held 2 part-time positions, both brief, both ending in explanations I had accepted without examining. What I suspected, the household expenses I had been quietly absorbing were not temporary. The groceries, the utilities, the streaming subscriptions, the car repairs, the occasional cash I left on the counter without mentioning it. I had never added it up. I realized sitting there at 4 in the morning that I had never added it up on purpose, because the number would have made it real. I got my reading glasses and opened my laptop. I had kept careful records my entire working life. Every receipt, every bank statement, every household ledger going back to the year my husband and I bought the house. I had not looked at these files with professional eyes in years. I had looked at them the way you look at old photographs, with affection, not analysis. I started looking at them differently that night. By 6 in the morning, I had a number, not an estimate, a number. 31 months of absorbed expenses, groceries, electricity, gas, water, internet. My son's car insurance that had somehow ended up on my account, 2 credit card charges I did not recognize that had been processed on a supplementary card I had given my son for emergencies 3 years ago and forgotten about. The number was not small. The number was the kind of number that changes how you understand a situation entirely. I closed the laptop and sat with the coffee I had stopped tasting. I was not angry yet. Anger is a feeling that needs somewhere to go, and I had not yet decided where this was going. What I felt was something quieter and colder. Clarity. The same thing I used to feel at work when a discrepancy in the books finally resolved itself and the true picture emerged. Not pleasant. I went back to my bedroom, showered, and dressed as if I were going to the office. There was someone I needed to call. Her name was Patricia Odom, and she had been a real estate and property attorney in San Antonio for 25 years. We had met through a church group before my husband died, back when I thought I would never need an attorney and she thought she would never need a bookkeeper. We had exchanged favors over the years, small ones, the kind that build a friendship slowly without either person noticing. I had not called her in 2 years. She answered on the second ring. "Dorothy," she said, and her voice carried the warmth of someone who means it. "It is early, I know," I said. "I am sorry, but I need to talk to you before I change my mind." She was quiet for a moment. "What happened?" I told her without rushing. My son and daughter-in-law moving in, the 3 years, the expenses, the question about adding her name to the deed. The hallway last night, my daughter-in-law's hand pointing away from the living room like I was a coat that needed to be put away. Patricia listened without interrupting, which is a skill that not enough people have. When I finished, she asked one question. "The deed, is it still in your name? Alone? Mine and my late husband's estate?" I said. "Transferred to me sole upon his death, recorded and clean." "Then you have not lost anything yet," she said. "But Dorothy, I want you to listen to me carefully. Go to your county clerk's office this week and pull a current title search. Before we do anything else, I want to make sure no one has filed anything on that property without your knowledge." The thought had not occurred to me. And then, the moment she said it had occurred to me before. Filed away under things I did not want to examine. The emergency card charges, the question about the deed, the way my daughter-in-law had started answering the door for the mail carrier herself. "I will go today," I said. "Good. Call me after." I sat at the kitchen table until I heard movement in the back of the house. Then I stood up, washed my coffee cup, set it in the drying rack, and drove to the county clerk's office before my son or his wife came into the kitchen, and I lost my nerve to an ordinary Saturday morning. The woman at the records counter was young and efficient and did not ask me why I needed a title search on my own property. She had probably seen enough to know that sometimes the person asking is the person who most needs the answer. She printed the report and slid it across the counter, and I took it to a chair by the window to read it. Everything was as it should be. The property was mine, unencumbered, no liens, no transfers, no recorded documents changing ownership or adding parties. I exhaled once, long and slow, but at the bottom of the report, under pending instruments, there was a flag. A document had been submitted for recording 11 days earlier, not yet processed, held for a secondary review due to a discrepancy in the notarization. The document type listed was a quitclaim deed. I read that line 4 times. A quitclaim deed is an instrument that transfers ownership interest from one party to another. It does not require a title search, does not require the receiving party to prove they own anything. It simply says, I give you whatever interest I have. In the hands of someone who already lived in a house, someone whose name appeared nowhere on the original deed, someone whose spouse was the adult child of the owner, the attempted filing of a quitclaim deed meant only one thing. Someone had been trying to quietly take my house. I sat in that chair for several minutes. The clerk's office hummed around me, phones and printers and low voices. I was aware of my hands being very still on the paper. I was aware of the particular silence that comes when something you feared turns out to be true, and there is nothing to do with the fear anymore because the truth is already in your hands. I took photographs of the document with my phone. Then I drove to a copy shop, printed 2 copies, put one in my purse and one in my glove compartment, and called Patricia from the parking lot. When I told her what I had found, she was quiet for longer than usual. Who signed it? She asked. The notarization discrepancy, I said. The document was held because the notary's signature did not match the registered notary's seal on file. Someone had tried to file a quitclaim deed with a fraudulent notarization. Dorothy, I know. Do you know whose name was being transferred to? I read her the name from the document. My daughter-in-law's name, listed as sole recipient. Patricia's voice when she spoke again was the voice of someone who has seen this before and is not surprised but is angry on your behalf. Come to my office Monday morning, she said. Bring everything. Do not mention this to anyone in that house. Do not change your behavior. I need you to act as if today was a regular Saturday. I can do that, I said. Can you? I spent 31 years finding discrepancies in ledgers and never letting the person responsible know until the report was complete, I said. I can manage a weekend. She made a sound that might have been a short laugh. Monday morning, Dorothy. 9 o'clock. I drove home slowly. The trees along the road were beginning to turn. That early October shift when the light changes before the leaves do. I noticed it the way you notice things when your mind is moving fast underneath a surface that is holding very still. I pulled into my driveway and looked at the house for a moment before I went inside. The house my husband and I had bought when we were 34 years old. The house where we had raised 2 children. Where I had stood at the kitchen window the morning he died and understood that the life we had built together would have to continue being built by me alone. I was not going to hand it to anyone. My daughter-in-law was in the kitchen when I came in, making lunch, her back to me. She asked where I had been without turning around. Just running errands, I said. She made a small sound and went back to what she was doing. I went to my room and spent the afternoon organizing every document I had into a single folder, orderly and complete, the way I had always prepared for a presentation. Monday came. Patricia's office was quiet and smelled like paper and good coffee. She had a legal pad already covered in notes by the time I sat down. We went through everything for 3 hours. The title search, the attempted quitclaim deed, the credit card history, the expense records I had compiled, the timeline of my son's employment gaps. Patricia was systematic and unhurried. She asked questions that required precise answers, and I gave them. By 11 o'clock, she had told me what my options were. The attempted deed filing was a serious matter. The fraudulent notarization made it a criminal issue, not merely a civil one. Whether to involve law enforcement at this stage was my choice. What was clear was that the document needed to be formally challenged and flagged, which Patricia could handle immediately through the clerk's office. The occupancy situation, my son and his wife living in my house without a lease, without financial contribution, without any written agreement, was straightforward. Consent to occupy could be withdrawn. A proper notice would be served. 30 days. What about my son? I asked. She looked at me carefully. What about him? I need to know if he knew. About the deed. She was quiet for a moment. That I cannot tell you, she said. but the process will likely make it clear. I had thought about this through the entire weekend. My son was not a cruel man. He had not been a dishonest one. Not in the years I had known him, not in the 38 years I had raised him and watched him grow. But I had also watched him spend 3 years choosing comfort over responsibility, and I knew that people who choose comfort long enough eventually stop noticing the cost that someone else is paying. I did not know if he had known about the deed. I knew that not knowing was no longer the same as not responsible. "Serve the notice," I said. Patricia nodded once. "I will have my associate go to the house on Wednesday morning." I spent Tuesday evening the way I had spent the one before it. Quietly, dinner at the table, the television on, my daughter-in-law scrolling her phone at the kitchen counter, my son watching something in the back room. I washed the dishes, I wiped the counters. I said goodnight. I did not look at either of them differently. I simply looked at them clearly, perhaps for the first time, and understood the difference. Wednesday morning, I drove to a diner 2 miles from the house and ordered eggs and toast and a cup of coffee that I let go cold. At 9:47, my phone buzzed. Patricia's associate, notice served. At 9:51, my son called. "Mom." His voice was confused, not angry. "Not yet. There is a man here who gave us papers. It says we have 30 days to vacate the premises." "Mom, what is going on?" I set down my fork. "Read the notice carefully," I said. "I will talk to you both this evening. Not now." "What do you mean, not now? This is our home." "It is my home," I said. "There is a difference. We will talk tonight." He started to say something else and I ended the call. I sat in the diner for another 20 minutes. Outside the window, San Antonio went about its morning, unbothered. Somewhere on the other side of the city, my son was holding a legal document and beginning to understand that patience is not the same thing as permanence. That evening I sat at the kitchen table and waited for them. They came in together, my son in front, my daughter-in-law a step behind with her arms crossed and her face already arranged for combat. My son held the notice. He set it on the table between us like it was something that might bite him. I spoke first, before either of them had the chance to decide what tone this conversation was going to take. "I know about the quitclaim deed," I said. The room shifted. My son looked at the table. My daughter-in-law's arms uncrossed and then crossed again, tighter. "I know that a document was filed attempting to transfer ownership of this property to your name," I said to my daughter-in-law. "I know the notarization was fraudulent. I know it was filed 11 days ago and flagged by the county clerk before it could be processed. I have a copy. Patricia Odom has a copy. The county clerk has a record." The silence was the kind that has weight. My daughter-in-law looked at my son. My son did not look up. "Did you know?" I asked him. He raised his eyes then. They were the eyes of a man who has been caught somewhere between two truths and cannot find solid ground under either one. "I heard about it after," he said quietly. "She said it was to protect us if anything happened to you. I said it wasn't right, but you said nothing to me?" He had no answer for that. I looked at him for a long moment. He was my son, the same child I had driven to school every morning for 12 years. The same young man I had helped move into his first apartment, had called every Sunday without fail, had believed in without reservation for the better part of 4 decades. That did not change. What had changed was that I could no longer allow love to function as a blindfold. "I am not filing criminal charges," I said. "That is my choice, quote, and I have made it. But I want you both to understand something. The day that document was filed was the day this arrangement ended. Not because of the notice, not because of the 30 days, because someone decided that the way to secure a future was to take mine, and that is not something I can share a house with." My daughter-in-law's voice came out hard and defensive. "Everything we did was for this family. We were protecting our investment." "You have no investment here," I said. "You have lived in my house for 3 years and contributed nothing to it financially. That was my choice, made out of love for my son. What you attempted was not protection, it was acquisition, and I want you to be clear on the difference." She stood up. "This is not over." "For me it is," I said. My son walked her out of the kitchen. I heard voices in the back of the house, too low to make out, too strained to mistake for anything other than what they were. I sat at the table and did not move. After a while, the bedroom door closed. The house settled into a quiet that felt different from the quiet I had been living in, not empty, but honest. My son came back alone. He sat down across from me. He looked like a man who has been asleep for a long time and is only now beginning to feel the stiffness. "I didn't know how bad things had gotten," he said. "Tell me," I said. He told me. The debt his wife had accumulated over the previous 4 years before they moved in. The credit line she had opened in both their names without his full understanding of the terms. The way staying in my house had allowed them to make minimum payments while she told him they were getting ahead. The plan that had never quite materialized. The conversations he had not pushed hard enough on because pushing hard felt like losing something he was not ready to lose. I listened without interrupting. When he finished, I asked only one question. "Where does the money go, month after month?" He shook his head. "I don't know all of it." "Then, that is where you start," I said. "Not with me." He stayed at the table for a long time after that. I made tea and left a cup near him without comment. We did not speak much, but the silence between us was different from the silence of the previous 3 years. It was not the silence of things being avoided. It was the silence of things being finally, uncomfortably seen. The 30 days passed the way consequential things often do, not dramatically, but steadily. My daughter-in-law moved out in the second week, quietly, while my son was at a job interview across town. He came home to half-empty closets and a note that was, by his description, mostly about money. He sat in the kitchen that evening and stared at the table for a long time. I did not tell him I was sorry. I did not tell him I had warned him. I made dinner and set a plate in front of him and let him eat without having to answer for anything that night. Some truths need time before they can be spoken without breaking something important, and I had learned by then that patience applied correctly is a different thing entirely from patience applied out of fear. He found a room to rent 2 weeks later, a small house across town, a decent neighborhood, a landlord who knew the family he was renting to. He paid his first month's rent with money he had earned. The morning he moved his things out, he stood at the front door with 2 bags and looked at me with an expression I recognized as the beginning of something, not the end. "I love you, Mom," he said. "I know," I said. "Go build something." He nodded and walked to his car, and I watched him pull out of the driveway the way I had watched him leave for school 30 years earlier, with the same complicated mixture of worry and faith that is the specific weather of loving a child for a lifetime. I closed the door and stood in the hallway for a moment. The house was quiet, not empty. There is a difference, and it took me several days to fully understand it. The emptiness of the previous 3 years, the kind that fills itself with noise and motion and carefully avoided conversations, was gone. What remained was the kind of quiet that belongs to a space that has been returned to its purpose. I opened every window that afternoon. I moved my armchair back to its place by the front window, the one with the faded blue upholstery. I made coffee and sat in it and watched the street outside the way I used to on Saturday mornings before everything became complicated. A neighbor walked past with her dog. I raised my hand. She raised hers. Small things. But they were mine again. In the weeks that followed, my son called on Sundays. Not every Sunday at first, and when he did call, the conversations were careful and a little formal, the way conversations are when people are relearning how to speak honestly with each other. But they came more often, and they grew easier. And one evening in November, he called not to ask for anything but to tell me about a project he had taken on at work and the way it was going well. He sounded like himself. The version of himself that existed before comfort became a substitute for direction. We are not past it yet. I want to say that plainly. 3 years of silence does not resolve in a few phone calls, and I carry my own share of what those 3 years were. I should have spoken sooner. I should have set the terms clearly from the beginning, a timeline, an agreement, an honest conversation about what we each needed. Love did not require my silence. I had only convinced myself that it did, and it took someone pointing me down a hallway in my own house to make me understand the cost of that conviction. I have had that conversation with myself more than once, and I suspect I will keep having it. What I know now, with the certainty of someone who has finally stopped pretending otherwise, is this: being generous is not the same as being a resource. Being patient is not the same as being a doormat, and saying nothing when something is wrong does not protect the people you love. It only protects the wrong. One evening in December, my son's wife called me. Not to argue, not to threaten. Her voice was flat and tired, and underneath it, somewhere I had to listen carefully to hear, something that might eventually become honest. She said she was sorry. She said she had convinced herself that the house was the foundation she needed to build on, and she had stopped asking where that foundation came from. She said she knew it didn't change anything. She was right that it didn't change anything, but I thanked her for saying it, because I have been around long enough to know that an apology that costs something is worth receiving. I have a neighbor, a woman in her 70s named Constance, who stopped me in the driveway one afternoon and asked how I was doing with the house being quiet. The way she asked it told me she had some version of the same story in her past. We stood in the cold for longer than either of us planned and talked about property and children, and the particular loneliness of a certain kind of generosity. 2 weeks later, I invited her for coffee. She brought a woman she knew. That woman brought another. By January, 4 of us were sitting at my kitchen table on Thursday afternoons with cups of tea and the specific ease of people who have stopped needing to explain themselves. The conversations are different every week. Sometimes they are about small things, gardens and television shows and grandchildren, but sometimes they go deeper. The way they did one afternoon when Constance mentioned that her son had been asking her to consolidate her accounts with his for convenience, and the word convenience landed in the room in a way that made all of us look up. I pulled a folder from the shelf by the window. Not the same folder from before. A new one, with clean paper and a fresh pen inside. Convenience is a word that usually means convenient for someone else, I said. Let's look at the actual numbers. We looked at the numbers together that afternoon. We asked the questions that are easy to avoid when the person asking them might feel their answer. We did not call it anything significant. We were just 4 women at a kitchen table in San Antonio, drinking tea and reading the small print. But I know what it was. It was the thing I wished someone had done for me 3 years earlier. It was the conversation that starts before the folder full of corrections becomes necessary. That night, I sat in my armchair by the window and turned on the evening news. The volume was exactly where I wanted it. No one suggested it should be otherwise. No one was calculating what they could take from the quiet. There is a thing that happens when you reclaim a space that was taken from you slowly. You do not reclaim it all at once. It comes back in small moments. A cup of coffee made at your own pace. A Sunday afternoon with no one to accommodate. A chair positioned where you want it in a room that is finally, simply, yours. Those moments accumulate. They become the texture of a life that is being lived on its own terms again. My husband had a saying he used when something was fixed after being broken for too long. He would look at whatever it was, the leaky faucet, the stuck window, the engine that finally turned over, and he would nod once and say, "There it is." That is what I feel most evenings now, when the house is quiet and the light is right and I am exactly where I am supposed to be. There it is. I want to leave you with what I know to be true, not what I wish were true, because that is the only kind of leaving worth doing. Love does not ask you to disappear. If someone requires your silence to feel comfortable in your own home, they are not loving you. They are using the space where your voice used to be. Setting a boundary is not an act of cruelty. It is an act of clarity. And clarity, I have learned, is one of the most loving things you can offer the people you care about, even when they are not ready to receive it. If you are listening to this, and you are sitting in a room in your own house, wondering when you stopped feeling at home in it, please hear me. The door back to yourself is closer than you think. You built this. You paid for this. You are allowed to remember that. Now I want to hear from you. What did this story bring up for you? And where in the world are you listening from today?